is for us to have you here tonight, because you keep encouraging us to think about how to keep making change, the political changes you've seen for women's liberation and social justice.
I was born into a more rigid version of the hierarchy that we have. The great aha was that I was not crazy, the system was crazy. Right? And I think a lot of us came to that in different ways, that whether we were experiencing being put into a particular place because of our class or our race or our accent or our gender or whatever it was. If you grow up thinking that that's inevitable, then we're really going to have democracy till we have democratic families. Consciousness precedes. The idea that it could be different precedes making it different. But it wasn't until I was about 40 in my life that there was clearly a movement that included me fully. When the women's movement came along, it really made a difference because I realized that I was not alone. Suddenly there was a community of women talking to each other and expressing things they thought only they had felt and discovering all these other people who felt the same thing. Mm-hmm. Now at least we have words like sexual harassment, words like domestic violence, all these words we didn't have before, and that's a big help. We understand it could be different. We've succeeded in changing the majority consciousness in this country. This is huge. Look at the public opinion polls. The majority of this country supports same-sex marriage, which didn't seem possible, I don't know, 20 years ago. But it also means we have a backlash, because now the people who were in the majority, they're a bit at sea because the old hierarchy is disappearing that they were depending on. They fear that we're going to do to them what they did to us. But actually we're not. Once you've experienced discrimination, you're less likely, actually. This backlash is dangerous because it has a lot of power and money and anger. So even though we are in the majority, we don't know for sure what's going to happen. And we sometimes get discouraged because the majority is represented of the minority. But we are the majority, we're going to do it anyway.
You mentioned a project that you're working on, sort of bringing to light the history of the role that women of color always played in the feminist movement. And
the three of us got mad at about the same time. And said, wait a minute. So we're doing a book that we hope will be informative and entertaining. That because of the film, The Hidden Figures, we think of as the hidden figures of the women's movement. Redefining the women's movement. The women like Fannie Lou Hamer were doing feminist things, but you don't know it. And then there were women you don't know who were leading all these issues too.
Capturing many voices is a sort of inspiration for how we think about how we do work.
That the word inclusive sounds like white women have the power to include.
Yeah.
Black women were the leaders. Kennedy and Fannie Lou Hamer and the National Welfare Rights Organization.
In anticipation of your visit, we sort of opened up on social media, people to ask questions with the hashtag #AskGloriaOhio. Kimberly Zindak from Cincinnati, Ohio. If you could give any advice to your 30-year-old self, what would it be?
I think I would just say, it's going to be okay. Because then I was still thinking that you had to follow a particular pattern, and even though I wasn't married and I didn't have children, I kept saying, no, I'm definitely going to do that, just not right now, because I thought everybody had to. The women's movement didn't come into my life until my late 30s, and then I suddenly said, oh, wait a minute, I'm happy. It's going to be okay, and you can follow your interest, follow what you love.
Valerie Griffith from Columbus, Ohio, wants to know what worries you most about the future for women in the United States.
What is that I worry that what happens to women is still in a silo over here, as if it were separate from everything else, as opposed to pretty much the basis of everything else. Because hierarchies pretty much start with controlling reproduction, which means controlling women's bodies in order to decide how many children and who they belong to and what race and caste and violence against females in the home is the most reliable predictor by far of all other forms of violence. Look at all this so-called senseless crime, men who go into public places and shoot people they don't know. First of all, they're 100% men, white, middle class, not poor. They're exactly the people who are most likely to, through no fault of theirs, have been brought up to believe that men have a right to dominate. And then when it turns out not to be true, they go a little crazy. And it's not in their self-interest. I mean, they often even kill themselves after they commit these crimes. But the biggest predictor of that is that they have been violent to the women in their lives before that. But this connection is not made enough. For instance, Zimmerman, who killed Trayvon Martin, had been violent to women in his life. It wasn't even admissible in his trial. He was wrongly let off and has continued to be violent against women. So if we had made that connection, Trayvon Martin might be alive. It's also true of cops, incidentally. Cops who are racist, unjustly violent against black men, especially, and women too, black women too, have disproportionately been violent towards the women. As long as women are viewed as a thing over here and all the other serious issues are over there, we won't, for instance, be assessing our foreign policy according to the position of women in the group or culture we're looking at. The surest way to predict a terrorist group is that they are gender polarized in the extreme. I mean, not now, but even during the Obama administration, I don't know that that was really as much of a part of our assessment of everything as it should have been.
Ellie Clark from Athens, Ohio asks us, how can we give voices to girls and women who are not in positions of power to confront their abusers? You and Jane Fonda both recently talked about how the hashtag #MeToo only providing a platform for calling out famous men.
And especially on a campus, you have a great opportunity to just sit in a circle and say, what has your experience been? And what has your experience been? And also, since it is about power, not sex, it's more likely to happen to people who have less power. The restaurant business, for instance, employs millions of people. And because it's dependent on tips, because they're wrongly exempt from minimum wage because they're tipped, and it's disproportionately female, they are very subject to this. As long as dominance and power are sexualized, children will be sexualized. Because if you can't get the proper amount of dominance from an adult, you will be magnetized by a child. And it also explains at the other end the conduct of men like Harvey Weinstein, who produced great movies with great women. Meryl Streep, the movie Frida about Frida Kahlo with Julie Taymor. He distributed the movie about sexual abuse on campus, The Hunting Ground. Yes. He was obviously abusing people with less power. And we have to admit that women sometimes do it too. It is not only men. Women guards in prisons, where there are a lot of young men, and abusing the young men. And the very first case that was won under sexual harassment law was a woman executive in California who was requiring the sexual services of a much younger man who worked. We're not exempting women here, it's just that women aren't rewarded for being aggressive, so it's statistically way more likely to be men. Once we see that it's about power, not sex. And I find that what helps a lot of men to understand this is to look at prisons where men who are not otherwise gay and may even be homophobic, in the absence of women, sexually abuse younger, weaker men. So what could be clearer than that? That it's about the false sexualization of power. But I hope we don't lose in all of this the fact that human sexuality is not about power. It is about mutuality, mutual pleasure and bonding. Human beings, I think, are the only animals who are equally sexual whether we can procreate or not. And so it's clearly not just about having progeny, it's about bonding and pleasure, and in the importance of no, we shouldn't lose the power of yes.
Gender fluidity, for instance, might help us or sort of inspire us to maybe reconsider this.
You know, that anytime we can challenge the binary, the world is divided into two kinds of people, those who divide everybody into two kinds of people.
Keely Riesbeck, also from Athens, Ohio. We're coming into an age where one's gender identity is less of an issue than ever before. Where does this really fit inside modern feminism?
You know, in all those psychology courses where they say what's masculine, that you take all human qualities, this big circle of human qualities, and about a third are called feminine, and 2/3 are called masculine. So we're more limited, but men are limited too. You know, all those empathy and attention to detail and patience, it's really just everything that's necessary to raise children. And men who are raised with that have it too. There are men who are great parents, and if we raised our boys to be parents and gave them dolls and let them be babysitters, and you know, in New York once we had a group called Oh Boy Baby, 6th grade boys who went to a child care center once a week to take care of babies. And at first they said, if babies, you know, they pee and you have to change them. But of course, then they got interested because babies are really interesting. So the program got its name because every Thursday or whatever, they said, oh boy, babies. And I think those boys were way more likely to grow up to be whole people.
Katie Croft from Athens, Ohio asks, what do you do to cultivate positive energy, and where do you find hope these days?
Here, you know, but I think we find it with each other. Human beings are communal animals. We are not meant to be alone too much. Well, I would say I find hope wherever there are a few people in a circle talking to each other, saying, here's what happened to me, what can I do about it? Dancing and poetry and sex, it's where you find hope. And why would you not? Why would you let anybody take your hope away? Hope is a form of planning. If our hopes weren't already real inside us, we couldn't even hope them. It's a consciousness that's already there.
This is from Mary Beechler from Athens, Ohio. Asks, how do we best support young women today?
We know we're worth listening to because somebody listens to us. Just like we know we're lovable because somebody loves us. So the more we can say, what do you care about, what interests you, let's do this together, how can I, and we can do it across groups or generations. Or, you know, you can't make somebody feel valuable and hopeful by telling them what to do. It's by supporting the unique person who's inside there. Young women are so exciting. You know, I hope I'm useful to young women because I remember when it was worse, so I can guarantee that the general trend line is up. I realized that in an audience like this, when like a 12-year-old girl stood up in the discussion time and said to me, I am becoming, in many ways, a young woman who takes no shit. And young women and young men have better shit detectors than those who have had to put up with more. So we learn from each other, we need each other. So one of the last really bad divisions is putting old people by themselves. I mean, we need age integration in the same way that we need every other kind of community.
I know we have some young women in our audience. I think we have 3 Girl Scout troops from there. Wanting to know, how did your single gender experiences in all women's colleges and Girl Scouts, how did that shape your perspectives on leadership?
Well, I'm not sure I knew it at the time that I was living in East Toledo, which is not Toledo. Have you ever noticed how everything that's the wrong thing has an adjective? It was kind of tough. In the 6th and 7th grades, there was a Girl Scout troop, and they were great. You know, they took us on camping trips and just taught us so much, and we did things together and we talked to each other. It made a huge, huge difference. And years later, when I was sitting at Ms. Magazine, I got a letter with a little photograph these two old white-haired ladies with their arms around each other's shoulders. Of course, it was a lesbian couple, but who knew at that point? They were wonderful. I was so grateful for them. And the problem was, and I say this to the Girl Scouts, that after that came adolescence and the extreme pressure of gender. Because as soon as you're capable of bearing a child, suddenly the gender role comes down and you're like the Iron Maiden, you know. And we didn't talk about being Girl Scouts anymore. Tremendously valuable. I don't know that I could have grown up without it. They were tough times, and that made all the difference.
People wanted to know the people in your life who inspired you. So Stephanie Schmidt, also from Athens, Ohio.
I mean, I think first of all, the man killer, because I think she was brought me the most knowledge I didn't have. And by that I mean that there were, and still are, 500 or 600 cultures and language groups and so on, and Indian country here before Europeans showed up, that were Cherokee, and I don't know all the languages by any means, but most of them seem not to have had gendered pronouns. They didn't even have he and she. People were people. The paradigm of society was a circle, not a hierarchy, not a pyramid. There was no word for nature because we were part of nature. Our Constitution, of course, was based on the Iroquois Confederacy, which was layers of consensus. And I think now we learn that in law school at least. The suffrage movement, which was inspired by the Seneca women in upstate New York, and the European American women could see this equal society over there. And meanwhile, the Seneca women could see these white women, and they referred to them as those who died in childbirth, because they were appalled. But Elizabeth Cady Stanton, all these people could see those women over there and decided for themselves when and whether to have children. It was just entirely different. They controlled agriculture and then hunted, but they both were necessary. So because she taught me so much that I had no idea, and because if it happened once, it can happen again in a new way, I guess I would say, well.
I've been inspired listening to colleagues, either read in his magazine or listened to you speak. Really pivotal moments in people's lives that were sort of able to transform their vision of what they could do. How do you think that feminism can or maybe even should transform someone's life?
It's just the realization for each of us, whatever our outsides look like, that each of us is a unique combination of millennia upon millennia of heredity and environment combined in a way that could never have happened before, could never happen again. And at the same time, we are human, and we are part of the natural universe. And feminism is one of many paths to get there, to get out of the hierarchical thing and understand that as humans we are linked, we are not ranked. Mother will say, what would you tell my daughter? And I always say, I tell your daughter not to listen to me, to listen to herself. And we're there to support her, and her voice, and her interests.
Feel free to come up and ask your question.
Right, I think the lights are going to come up so we can all see each other, and we become more of a circle. And you don't have to ask a question. You can also make an organizing announcement. Tell me what I need to know that I don't know.
If you could design or create a patch or journey for Girl Scouts, what would it be?
We have a lot of patches that I don't know. I guess maybe a globe, because to say we're all on Spaceship Earth. Either that or maybe a bird, because I think the human race is a bird with two wings. And if one is broken, then a bird can't fly.
As a writer, do you have any specific advice for young female journalists, especially ones that are trying to break in the field, like fresh out of college?
It's both easier and harder now, isn't it? Because you can get on the web and you can get your work out there, but you can't make a living. I wouldn't write for the Huffington Post and all those places, they don't pay their writers. It's really wrong. Write what you're passionate about and care about, or you find funny or amusing, and write it so people can understand it. Maybe read it out loud. I find it helpful to read what I write out loud because then you know what's extraneous that you should get rid of. And just get a lot of samples of your writing so that you can say to publishers or online posters, here's what I do. Look at the happenings around you in the news and see what isn't being said. Is an aha, and people will want to publish it, put it online, read it.
One of the women that I most admire in this region, who works very closely with families and children, a lot in domestic situations, domestic abuse, etc. But she understands, obviously we are in Athens, and it is a bubble with a campus that is incredible, and there are so many of us that have worked so hard to get where we are. And my question though is, how do we look beyond our bubbles? I mean, how do we go into our rural areas? How do we look at Appalachia? And how do we make sure that, that we're building other women up, and that this movement that we've worked forever, how do we make sure that that's relevant to everyone?
Here in Athens, you're lucky because you are a campus in the midst of a very poor surrounding area. You can connect with the surrounding area and be helpful. Women's centers have often served both the campus and the community at the same time. Battered women's shelters have often been places where students and faculty worked. So traditionally, I think, or not so traditionally, they haven't been around that long, Black studies and women's studies and everything I think of as remedial studies have been more likely to have ties with the community than most other academic areas. Big opportunity. It may well inform you, and you may learn more than from your courses, but it's not always so easy. There is what used to be called town gown tensions and differences, but I think especially there are kinds of connections that come from a movement can surpass that.
The Women's Center does our Office for Diversity and Inclusion, but I think it's also always important to think of, what more can we do?
What you could do too is make the state legislature show up.
Many young females like myself are working towards degrees that lead to careers that are very much male-dominated. And I was wondering what advice you might give to someone like me and the other girls on campus to how they might navigate these careers. I'm going into political science.
I think you should just have the attitude that there's this poor, benighted world out there that doesn't know what democracy is. And you can help them because you come from an underrepresented group. And you can make connections that are not being made. Like, when I was just saying that if you don't have a democratic family, well, you're never going to have a democracy outside. That is not something you hear in Washington. You can bring that, right? They're certainly in deep shape now with sexual harassment.
I was wondering what your advice would be on how to best handle casual sexism in the workplace and in the school environment.
I would say, first of all, just to name it. If I did something that offended you, I would want you to tell me, not just hate me. Tie it to a form of discrimination that guy himself may have experienced and might be able to connect it to sexism so people understand that it's hurtful. There's one thing worse than it's not working, and that's not doing it. Because then you will walk around thinking, what if I had said? To name it in a way that you would want it named to you. If that doesn't work, to escalate. If that doesn't work, get a few other people. If that doesn't work, ticket. If that doesn't, write letters of complaint, expose, I don't know.
I'm an older feminist. I'd like more help with how you see feminism in the world in 2018. Patriarchy is still with us. Is there still a space, a place for women-only space, for women's separatism, or not?
It isn't because we're mad at men. It's because when we are in a group of women by ourselves and we think there's something missing, what we're missing is the rest of ourselves. It's the role that men have played in our lives. It shouldn't be something that is publicly funded and it excludes men. We're not trying to do that, but privately. And I think men also have meet in, they're probably men's groups, right? Men's locker room kind, but the people I know who have survived and prospered and had a good time usually had a group of girlfriends who kind of chosen family, not because we were mad at men or excluding men, but because walking around female for 40 or 50 years does give you some unique experiences that you can then help each other with.
I know that with everything that's going on in Hollywood and in politics with these famous men that are being called out for abusive behaviors, it's a weird sort of way that we as a society seem to be sort of pushing off this collective problem that we have onto a few like boogeymen at the top. But is there a way that we can, when we're talking about this, when we're having this conversation with other people, that we can sort of reckon with these things more holistically as a symptom of a greater problem in our society as opposed to just like a few bad guys who got away with some stuff?
A second wave of immediate stories needs to be done about the responses of men. Because a man who says, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it, I hurt people, is very different from the guy who says, no, I'm the victim, you're the attacker, I'm going to sue you, I'm going to punish you. DARVO is called, you know, there's a whole little acronym for it. If you go online and look for Jennifer Freed, F-R-E-Y-D, you'll see massive research on the differences in response. Mom and I were trying to write a book together, and what we were doing was trying to take features of original, ancient, and continuing societies that we could learn from, pre-patriarchal societies that are still around. Ghanaian cultural group, that when a member of that group did something destructive, they punished that person by separating them out and leaving them alone for a period of time, because we're communal animals, so probably being isolated is a universal punishment. However, not like our solitary confinement, you know, they didn't do it. But when that person came back into the society, having been punished and having apologized, there was a long ritual amount of time when everybody who knew that person told them every good thing they ever did. You can do that. Is it knits people back into the culture and it rewards what we do that's positive. I'm not sure that Donald Trump has ever done anything. Way, that's almost not his fault because he doesn't know that from fiction. Because he has narcissistic personality disorder, as all the members of the AA told me. So, which means that he slavishly follows any praise and fights the smallest criticism. So he may not actually know fact from fiction. But most people do have to recognize the difference in response and reward the good things as well as maybe the bad.
I am originally from Puerto Rico, and I was just wondering what your opinions were on Mayor Carmen Yulín, who has inspired many women today for being so outspoken against our current orange leader.
I'm sure there are lots of voices in Puerto Rico, but she's the one that we hear standing up and not going along with the idea that anything that is adequate. She's very, very, very heroic and important, and an important truth teller. She is going to be always remembered. Right?
To be passionate is beautiful and it's necessary, but it's also extremely tiring. Some mornings I wake up and I'm like, I can do this, I know. And then other mornings I'm like, I'm just going to have kids and they can do it. You're tired, you're tired. What advice do you have to keep moving, I guess, as an individual?
Having kids would be harder. One of the ways in which I think young activists now are smarter than we were is that they talk about self-care. And we did not. So we just were flat-out activists until we were exhausted. And then it took us a long time to come back from that. Just to remember that if you want to have dancing and poetry and sex and joy at the end of the revolution. You have to have dancing and poetry and sex and joy along the way. Marx and Engels and everybody were. The error of their philosophy, seems to have been that they said the ends justifies the means, when in fact the means you choose create the ends you get.
I want to know what made you want to be a journalist.
It was partly because I just grew up reading books. I mean, I wasn't going to school much, and so I was reading. I mean, I thought Louisa May Alcott was the be-all and end-all of the world. And I imagined that she was going to come back to life, or would I show her? And of course, and I read everything, including her novels and nonfiction, you know, that were recording the world around her. The ability to record without being an actor in it probably appeals to women disproportionately. My mother had been a journalist, which I didn't even know, because it happened long before I was born. But nonetheless, I absorbed it a little bit from her. The test of what you want to do is partly, I think, that when you're doing it, you don't think you should be doing something else. So, and I would say writing is the only thing that's true of.
In today's political climate, we so clearly have a leader who's kind of blatantly misogynistic and oppressive, just out in public. How to stay positive, especially with our younger generation and us as women, you know, trying to stay positive and keep barreling through and keep this feminist movement going and really have a say in
I don't know that ever in my life I've had such a convenient, complete package of everything that's wrong. So useful. I mean, first of all, he's an unsuccessful businessman.
Right.
Somebody figured out, right, that if he had just invested the money he inherited, he would be richer than he is.
Right.
He's gone bankrupt innumerable times. You know, I mean, it's hard to find everything wrong in the same package. So I would say that if we really work hard, he will have been the thing in history that turned it around, because we are woke.
So I have a 6-year-old niece who looks up to me and her mom for guidance, and she's just starting school and starting to realize that there are these pre-placed stereotypes on her. How do I help shift her outlook on things and help her grow into a strong woman?
You know, I trust your instincts. You'll figure out how to do it. But I was just at a celebration of a friend, an African-American man, who is a great man and who started out with a lot of difficulties. But his mother used to just say to him about the racism around him and people, the neighbors who didn't want him to come into their house. They're sick. They're sick. Racism is a disease and they're sick. And you just have to feel sorry for them. Some people, it's not their fault, but they grow up thinking that, you know, boys are better than girls, or only boys can do one thing. But, you know, you just have to be patient with them because they're sick.
My mother was a big fan of yours. She really admired you. And because she admired you, she exposed me to some of your writings and your speaking and being active in Girl Scouts. And she also allowed me to choose whatever I wanted to do. Did I want to do a Star Wars toys or Barbies or Vogue cover? It was all up to me that way. And on the very first issue of Ms. Magazine, of course, you had Wonder Woman. I used to dress up as Wonder Woman, like cut out paper and make my own tiaras and bracelets and everything. And I wondered if you knew the impact that Wonder Woman would have on us 75 years later, and if what your creative process was in choosing her to be on the cover.
Well, my creative process was just like yours. I grew up with Wonder Woman. Remember, think about my age. You know, she was the only, pretty much the only female comic book hero. There was Sheena of the Jungle or something. So I had grown up with her. And by the time the magazine was about to start, I realized that, you know, from looking at the comic books, that Wonder Woman had suffered the bad 50s and 60s, like so many of us did. So she had lost all of her magical powers. no bracelets, no lasso. And there was Joanne Edgar, another editor of the magazine. She also had grown up with Wonder Woman. So both of us thought that if we put the original Wonder Woman on the cover and put some of the Golden Age original strips in the magazine, that we could create support for giving her back herself. And we worked and we, lobbied and drove DC Comics utterly crazy until finally the guy who was head of the comics that day called me up and he said, okay, she's got her magic lasso back, she's got her bracelets back, she's got her invisible plane back, and she has a black Amazon sister named Nubia. Now will you leave me? So it was great to see the movie. I must say, maybe I'm a sucker, I don't know, but I really loved the movie. Did you? Yes, we rescued Wonder Woman.
Hi, I'm a high school student, and I often find myself struggling with knowing how to share my beliefs on gender equality and enlighten people around me who are not so knowledgeable about this kind of subject. And I was wondering if you had any advice on how to do that in a setting where a lot of people are not very susceptible to those ideas.
Well, in general, I would just try to do it the way that you would want somebody to do it for you if you weren't understanding something that really mattered. I mean, this is what we do in organizing meetings, so what do you say when they say,
Casual sexism, and that does happen a lot in high school.
Can you give me a couple of examples?
Talking about this recent sexual harassment allegations, and there are some boys and people, even girls, who get a joke about it and kind of laugh it off and say that the people who are standing up and saying that they were sexually harassed are making a big deal about it and are not worthy of saying that. And I find myself coming across a little too strong to these people.
Right. Well, maybe instead of saying, no, you're wrong, you could say, reverse it. Reversal is a great tactic, I find, because even the power to define is very political. So if a man comments on your appearance and you comment back on his appearance, he's shocked, even though it's complimentary in both cases. Nonetheless, you've taken the power to define, or renaming it. I mean, rape is not just rape, it's body invasion. And men get body invasion when you talk about prisons, especially saying men who are not otherwise gay use younger, weaker men as if they were women. It's anything that can produce empathy. Get the person who's talking to think what would happen if they were at the wrong end of that experience, rather than saying you're wrong.
I also go to Athens High School, and I find that a lot of people here, and also in general, seem to think that misinjury is the face of feminism. Misinjury?
Misogyny.
A lot of people seem to think that's equal
We
to
hate men,
feminism.
that's basically what you're saying.
Yeah, so that women think that they're better and we want more. So how do we prevent and combat this? Because it seems simple, but it's really hard to rationalize.
We would not sink to that level, are you kidding me? So they think that to interrupt male supremacy is to downgrade men. But maybe a racial parallel would help. To call out racism is not to say anybody wants to be white. On the contrary, it's kind of calling for human contact.
Something you think that they are taught, sort of bringing from home? Is it something you feel like they're getting from the media?
I think it's the media, and I think maybe it's home as well. I find the word feminazi often associated with me as someone who just wants equality.
But that was Rush Limbaugh, who's an asshole. He's been calling us all feminazis for, 25 years at least?
Yeah, that term's been around forever.
Okay, here's the answer. I once wrote a long essay that the Nazi policy towards women was anti-feminist in the extreme. Hitler came to power on an anti-feminist platform. He got a woman from England. He couldn't find a woman sufficiently anti-feminist in Germany, because Germany, between the wars, had become a very democratic place. There were more women in the Bundestag than in any other parliament. There was a big gay lesbian movement. You know, that's what he was running against. So he imported a kind of Phyllis Schlafly person from England to tour around, and his whole platform was Kinder, Kirche, kitchen, church, children. That was the whole ballgame. And the first thing he did when he came to power was to padlock the family planning clinics and declare abortion a crime against the state. And he created Lebensborn, where women, white women, of course, Aryan women, meant to have babies endlessly. So it's the opposite. I wrote an essay that you can find, I'm sure, called "If Hitler Were Alive Today, Whose Side Would He Be On?"
Beginning of many of my classes, I'll tell my students, you know, I'm a feminist and this is what it means to me. And I once had a student say, call yourself a feminist if it has a problematic baggage to it. And I said, well, that's why I became a professor, so I get to explain every day what it means. And I see this as an opportunity. I get to keep explaining to you what it means. Yeah.
And if things get rough, you can just say to a woman, if the only alternative to being a feminist is being a masochist. And see what happens.
Like women had come forward before, but their cases were swept under the rug and settlements protect the image of their company. And so I know that this is kind of a dividing question, but I'm wondering, can we truly reach gender equality under late capitalism, or is that issue of money always going to take precedent over feminist issues?
Well, one of the greatest ways to battle against capitalism is to take away cheap labor. If you got equal pay, it would be $200 billion more every year in the economy, which is, you know, the greatest stimulus we can possibly have. But I think we should also tot up and show how much has been paid out in settlements, private settlements, millions and millions and millions of dollars. And I think we need a lawsuit from stockholders against the corporations that have been secretly wasting their money, secretly paying huge amounts of money to hide the bad behavior of, you know, all these guys. So I think it's given us a lot of tools, anti-capitalist tools, if you know what I mean, that is in the way they understand, which is huge amounts of money that they are totally wasting.
I'm a homegrown activist, especially in the last few years, and I've noticed that there's a bunch of people in my generation, and everybody is getting involved the last few years, and it's truly inspiring. But with that, there's also people who are very, very much opposed to activists like me and everyone in this room, probably, who want to silence us and keep us from talking. This happens in our schools, this happens even at home sometimes, and on the internet. Obviously, there's lots of people who do it. Is there any way that activists that are a little timid and a little afraid of being called out or being persecuted for the hope we have to make things better, is there any advice that you'd like to give them?
Well, I've only lately learned what to say when people call me a bitch. Thank you. What I was saying before, you know, striving for empathy, trying to find something within their experience that might be a parallel to our experience, all of that is hopeful. I don't know about you, but here's part of the problem of our female socialization. If you put me in a room with 100 people over there who really want to do something together, and there are 30 people over there who are saying, no, this is stupid and dumb, I will go and try to convince the 30 people instead of moving with 100 people. You know, just ignore them and move with 100 people, because they're probably more with you than against you. We're so accultured to make nice and unify that we sometimes understand, we sometimes don't realize that in a way it's a form of authoritarianism. You know, sometimes I think, wait a minute, I'm saying, you don't agree with me? Let me explain it to you again. This is not so good either. Let them think what they think, but move with the people who want to move.
Thank you so much.
I'm from Toledo too, and I
saw you a few years ago at the Steinem.
It's incredible. It's this huge theater in Toledo where, like me, went to Wake High School and you find yourself back into was having an out-of-body experience.
Yeah. There is this great quote by Desmond Tutu that I wrote on my Women's March sign. If you are silent in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. And I feel like a lot of times, we talk about the opposing force and all that, but there are also just people that just don't care. And I'm like, come on, do something, we gotta care. And so it's kind of, how do I deal with this apathetic sort of culture and this sort of just people that don't care? Because it's great to be with all these people who do, but it's also kind of tiring to just be with people who just don't care.
I'm not sure there's one giant cure, but I think part of it is you're having fun, they see that you're happy, you're having a good time, you have a community, you have people who like you and you like them, you're doing fun things together, they'll begin to envy you. I think that happens a lot. We envy the community that comes with activism. That's one way. Another way is figuring out what they do care about. Another way is figuring out what it was that killed their parent. Who knows what happened to them as children. Not that you should spend your whole time doing this, but kind of trying to figure out why it is that they're not accessible emotionally.
At the beginning of last month, there was an article that went viral that talked about women of Generation X and how we're in our late 40s, late 30s, in that range, and how unbelievably stressed out. And we're the generation who benefited from the work your generation did, and we tried to take it out. I feel like we're turning into advice columnists tonight, so I won't ask for advice on behalf of my generation, but why do you think we are so, those of us who are no longer quite so young, why are we so strung out? Why have we lost so much of our hope?
Well, I suspect you know the answer way better than I.
I think we're tired. I speak for my friends and I, at least.
Well, maybe we're better.
It'll get better.
It'll get better. That we maybe had an idea of success that wasn't ours. That is, instead of saying we get to do what we love, we were saying we have to do it all. That is allowing the culture as it is, a male-dominated culture, which is not good for men either, to say, here's what professional success looks like, but then if you're a woman, you also have to have children and have 2 jobs instead of 1, which men couldn't do either. And, so it just added on instead of being able to select and do what we love. And I worry about it in the work area, and I worry about it when it comes to sex, because the idea of liberation is still mostly a male idea, which is more is better than, having sex with somebody you wouldn't have lunch with, which... So, which led bell hooks, I think, to say that for some women, liberation was celibacy. Liberation is whatever you want. It's whatever is right for you. It is not following the standard. And that includes making a lot of money. Here's what I would like to do, actually, to kind of reverse what you and I are talking about now. I have always wanted to give a course at Harvard Business School called Money is Boring. People who only care about money are boring. Unless you do something really creative and interesting with it, who cares? Who cares how much you die with? You're probably blighting your children to leave them an inheritance that means that they're never going to do anything. I just think we need to question the standards of success, or what we should, to question the shoulds, and strive to look, at what we really care about and love and want to do.
I still have so many questions, but we're getting near the end of our time, so I think we have time for just one more from
I'm answering too long, that's part of it.
No, we want to hear your answer.
I want to preface my question by saying that you're just a beautiful woman, and just it's an amazing experience. Just
That's such a lovely thing to say, and I was walking in the street in New York the other day, and I was thinking, I was really happy as a young woman being smiled at by men I didn't know. But I'm really happier being smiled at by women.
a two-tiered question. I believe, from my perspective, that we are in the midst of an amazing time where all these movements are coming up because my generation is not afraid to speak their mind. And we're really lucky to be historically a part of this. Unfortunately, I find myself reading on a daily basis this rhetoric of my problem is more problematic than your problem within these movements. These multiple movements that are part of LGBTQA, trans movement, feminism, Black Lives Matter. As someone who's a minority, a feminist, and a woman, I find myself conflicted with these because I don't believe that my problem is more problematic than your problem should be a discourse that's occurring at these times. So just to shorten this, did you see this type of issue occurring when you were largely politically active in the second wave of feminism? And if you did or did not, what is your response to this?
Trying to prove you suffer the most is just another hierarchical thing, you know. So there's no competition of tears. Tears are tears. For whatever reason they come about. And I think to the best of our ability, we should just kind of not spend too much time on that, but just look at a problem and say, who does it affect? And we shouldn't work on it unless we have the people who it affects represented there, you know, because the people who experience the problem are going to know how to fix it the best. You know, look at the reality and say to people with entirely different experiences, is there a way I can help? And here's how you can help me. Just to kind of, you know, reach across that divide. Are there any announcements that we've missed? Any organizing announcements? Organizing announcements can get precedent.
I'm in charge of the period project at Athens High School. We're accepting donations for pads, and if you want to donate, that'd be really appreciated. They're also going to go to the middle school, who also has a period project.
What would your advice be when you find yourself in a situation, if you're like alone or even with a friend, like walking down the street or something, and you like a dude cat calls you or yells at you, and you know you want to yell back, like you want to be like F off, but you also don't want to die, you know, you don't want to be killed, so like, what do you do?
Well, I don't want you to get killed either, but it does remind me of, you know, there's infinite numbers of Jewish jokes, you know, and one is that two Jews are walking down the street, and, you know, they're telling the story of walking down the street and being scared of the two people walking behind them, and they're saying, but there were two people behind us and we were all alone. You know, so sometimes I think we have more power than we think. And we can respond. If they comment on our appearance, we can comment on theirs. We can laugh, say you must be kidding. You know, wait until you get in a safe spot, you know, under next to a building or something, and then say it. I don't know, but, you know, make a joke makes it. But I find it helpful to do something, because otherwise you walk around afterwards wishing that you had, and it makes you feel powerless. So whether it is reaching out in a friendly way, or making a joke, or just reversing the insult, whatever it is, nothing is true 100% of the time, I realize, but mostly it helps to do something.
I know we will walk away inspired to make the changes that we can in the spaces that we're in. So with that, let's give an enormous thank you. Oh, wait, she has something.
I have to make my traditional organizer's deal with you, if you don't mind, because I'm worried about, there's so many, so precious that we're here. So just promise me that before you leave, you will look around and see 2 or 3 people you don't know. And introduce yourselves, say what you're doing, what you care about. If you came here, you probably share a lot of hopes and dreams and values and jokes, and who knows. You might find a new job, a love affair. But it's very precious that we've been together in this room. And my hope is, for all of us, me included, that our lives will be a little better and more interesting the next day and the next and the next, because we